Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of my series of videos for the Mystigo games. 4-pack of card games which should be hitting Kickstarter sometime in October, possibly early in November. Now this is going to be a Kickstarter for 4 complete games that you're going to get in one set of games. And these are 4 different card games. Some of them are set collections, some of them are auctioning games. And they're different games that have different skill levels, different amount of player counts, anywhere from 2 to 4 all the way up to 3 to 5. And they have different ways of playing some of these games. Now these games are actually pretty darn quick and easy to teach, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how to play all 4 of these games in one single video, because you can pretty much teach each one of these games in about 2 minutes or less. Now I just want to emphasize before I start the full tutorial that this is a promotional copy of the game. These are not the final components. While I'm pretty sure most of the artwork is going to be pretty much done, especially with how well all this artwork does look, there's going to be some of the games, especially 60 Dwarves, which I'm going to show you next after I show you the Gallerist, which is going to have some extra components which weren't included but will be available in the final release of the game. One other thing to mention is the very first game I'm going to teach you is the Gallerist, which is actually going to have its name change when the Kickstarter starts. Apparently there's already a game available called the Gallerist, so the producers of this 4-pack, Mystigo Games, has decided that they're going to offer some kind of contest or some kind of spiff for the backers where they get to actually choose the new game for the Gallerist. I am going to refer to it as a Gallerist for this tutorial, but just do know that when the full game actually releases, it will have a new game title, but the rest of the game should be pretty much from what you see. So let's go start the tutorial with the very first game, which is going to be the Gallerist. The Gallerist is an auctioning game for 2 to 4 players where every player is going to get a hand of exactly 12 cards. Now in this hand of cards, players are going to have cards valued anywhere from 10 million to 150 million, plus they're going to have 2 very special cards. The very first special card is the sheet card, and the second one is going to be the forgery card. Players are going to be using these cards to try to auction for these paintings, which are going to have various different victory point values on them. The players are going to go through 12 entire rounds through 12 entire paintings, and at the end of the game, the players are going to add up all the value of all the paintings they have based on the victory points each one of these paintings is worth. Not only that, for every complete set of 3 paintings one player gets, they're going to get an additional 5 victory points. And you can tell if a painting is part of a set because they all have the same color background. For example, these 3 paintings are part of the same set because they all have the same colored border, while this painting you see right here has a different colored border, so you know it's part of a different colored set. So players are going to be vying trying to play their auctioning cards, which are usable one time only, and after you play your auction card, it's actually removed from the game, so you need to bid correctly, bid properly, and make sure you save the cards you need for the higher level auctions when you need them. Anyways, once a player has gone through all 12 rounds, you're going to add up all the victory points, and the player who has the most victory points is going to be the winner. On a player's turn, every single player is going to start with their entire hand of cards, and again, everybody does have 12 cards in their hand, and at the start of every single turn, one of these paintings is going to be revealed. The painting is going to be revealed to all the players, and the players are all going to see exactly how many victory points that painting is going to be worth. And then every player is going to look at their hand of cards, and they're going to decide exactly which one of their auctioning cards they want to play, hopefully in an effort to win that painting. So this painting right here is worth 10 victory points, so it might be worth more for a player to spend one of their higher cards to try to gain this card. So for example, player number 1 may decide that this painting is really worthwhile to them, so they're going to place their auction card face down. Every single player is going to get the chance to do the exact same thing, trying to figure out how much money they want to spend, remembering that every single one of their auctioning cards, once they've spent that auctioning card, is permanently spent and they're never going to get it back. So they want to make sure that they're trying to plan for whatever auctioning card they want to play to see just how valuable this painting may be for them at the end of the game. So after every single player has gone through their entire hand of cards and picked out which auctioning card they're going to play, all the players are then going to reveal their auctioning cards in order. Whoever happens to bid the highest amount is the one who gets to claim that painting, and then you're going to move on to the next auctioning round. Now, the trick here is that these specialty cards are going to change how the auctions are going to happen during the round. For example, if a player plays the sheet card, their bid this round is only going to be $40 million, but their next bid, no matter what it is, the value of that card is going to be doubled. So for example, this is player number 3 who played the sheet card. So in this round, he's only auctioning $40 million, but the next round, when the next painting comes out, for example, this painting, which is worth 12 victory points, the card that they auction is going to actually have double the value. So they may want to pick a card, such as their 100 million card for the next round, which is now going to be double the value. So effectively, the next round, they've now effectively auctioned $200 million. And so it's pretty much a good chance that they're going to go ahead and get this card. The other specialty card that's available in the game, though, is going to be the fraudulent card. Now, every single player has only one of those cards, and anytime one player places that card and plays it down as their bid, no matter how many victory points that painting is worth, it's actually going to be discarded. No player gets to claim that card because it's a fraud and it's not worth any money or any victory points. So players are going to continue playing the game for 12 solid rounds, and again, at the end of the game, players are going to add the value of all their paintings, not including the frauds because they're actually removed from the game, and if they have any sets of 3, they're getting an extra 5 victory points. Whoever has the most victory points at the end of the game is going to be the grand winner. Now, as I said earlier, every single player, when they place one of their auction cards on the table as part of an auction, that card is removed and they don't get to use that card on any future auctions. So as you're going through and playing your cards, your amount of cards that you have available for you to start bidding for more and more of these paintings is going to start being reduced. So the players have to play smart and play the auction cards that they want to play, depending on just how valuable that card may be for them because they make a set, or just because that card happens to be worth a lot of victory points. But they also have to be very, very careful and make sure that a card is not so valuable that another player decides that nobody should have it and decides to deem that that painting is going to be a fake. Again, the game is going to be played over 12 rounds. At the end of the 12 rounds, players add up all their victory points. Whoever has the most victory points is going to be the winner. Now, there is one exception to the rules, and that's if the highest bids happen to be tied for exactly how much they happen to be bidding on that turn. Now, if the highest bids for that turn happen to be tied, what's going to happen is the players who happen to be tied are going to have another bidding round. So in this example right here, let's say we have player 1's bid 100,000, player 2 has bid 50,000, player 3 has bid 100,000, and player 4 has bid 40,000. Again, they played the Sheik. So in the next round, their bid, whatever it may be, is going to be doubled. So since these two players happen to be tied for the highest bid, the other two players are going to remove their auction cards from the game, and then these two players are going to pick up their auction cards, place them back in their hands all over again, and then they're going to rebid for the exact same painting. Hopefully, they're going to manage to bid different amounts this time. And then they're going to reveal their bids, and again, then they're going to figure out who was the winning bid for that round. If players manage to duplicate their bids the second time and bid the exact same amount for the second time, then that painting is actually going to be removed from the game and nobody gets that painting, and both those auction cards are also going to be removed. That's the one exception to the rule. The second exception to the rule is if two players happen to both bid their Sheiks, and that means that they were also happen to be the highest bidders, then they're also going to be tied for the highest bid. That means they're going to take these cards back in their hands, and whatever card they play next, even though it's still part of the same auction, is also going to have its value doubled. Those are all the rules for the Gallerist, and that's basically how you play the entire game. Dr. Blender's Lab is a game for 2 to 4 players, and it's basically a set collection game. Players are trying to build either monsters or people or animals by grabbing all these cards. There's 3 sets of cards. There's cards for the head, there's cards for the torso, and there's cards for the leg. To start the game, at the start of the game, every player gets 3 cards. Every player is going to get 1 head card, 1 torso card, and 1 leg card. Then you're randomly going to create 3 creatures that don't really match it all together. You're basically going to build 3 creatures with head, torso, and legs 3 times, and once that's set up, you're ready to begin the game. There's 2 block tokens that are always involved in the game, no matter how many players you have playing the game. So in a 2-player game, 3-player, 4-player game, doesn't matter. There's always going to be 2 block tokens. So once all the players have their starting hands of cards, you basically just need to figure out who the starting player is. Now they say the person who's the starting player is the person with the most fingers and toes, but you can pick whatever method you want to pick to decide who goes first. On a player's turn, let's say this player happens to be player number 1. They're basically going to take their hand and look at all the cards they have in their hand, and then the other players who are not their current players are each going to take one of the block stones, and they're going to place it down on one of these cards, and that's going to block this player, preventing them from picking up those cards. Now again, there's only 2 block tokens a game. Doesn't matter if there's 2, 3, or 4 players. So in a 2-player game, if there's only 2 players, the one person who has their current turn is going to hold their cards in their hand, while the other player gets to place both of the block tokens. If there's a 3-player game, each one of the other players gets to place 1 block token apiece. And if it's a 4-player game, basically the remaining 3 players need to argue and try to figure out who exactly is going to place the block tokens. That's what the rules say. What I prefer to do is the next 2 players in turn order are the ones who each get a block token apiece. That prevents you from having lots of arguments, especially when you play this game with the younger players. Anyways, after players had their time to pick the cards up in their hand, the other players are going to pick one of the block tokens, and they're going to place it down on one of the cards in play, and basically they're trying to put it down on cards that they don't want this particular player to have. either because they know what cards are in their hand, or those are cards they want to put in their own hand because they want to work on building these bodies. So each player puts one blocking token down a piece, and then we're done placing the block tokens. Next, the player on their turn gets to pick one of the 3 colors in the game. Now there's 3 colors, red, green, and blue. And what you're basically going to do is you're going to name a color and pick up all the cards of that color. But what you can do before you make the announcement of that color is, if you want, you can choose 2 cards that happen to be in your hand. And this is completely optional. You don't have to do it, but you can, if you like, discard 2 cards from your hand into the respective discard piles for the correct piles. And these discard piles are always kept face up. Players can look through the discard piles at any time they want. But if I do decide that I do want to do that, what I can do is I pick one of these block tokens and completely remove it so that card is no longer blocked. Then what I need to do is I need to pick a color, and I'm going to pick up all the colors of that color. So if I say red, I'm simply going to pick up every single color currently laid out that's currently red, and those are going to go into my hand. Then all those cards are immediately going to be replaced from the draw pile. And then we're going to move on to the next part where I get to look at my hand of cards, and I need to pick any current player in play. And this is another optional thing. I don't have to do this, but if I want to, I can take any 2 cards in my hand and pick another player, hand those 2 cards to that player, and then I get to name a body part and a creature. If I name a body part and that player has that body part, they have to give me that body part. If they don't have it, they still get to keep the 2 cards they gave them either way. So for example, if I hand these 2 cards to this player and I decide to say Dracula's head, if they have Dracula's head, they're forced, they have to actually hand that card over to me, and now that card is now in my hand. Once I've done that part, I can look through my hands and see if I'm able to build 1 creature. Now you can't build more than 1 creature in your turn, but if you are able to build 1 creature and you have all the matching body parts, you simply lay out the head, the torso, and the legs, and then your turn is over, and the next player is going to start their turn. So we'll move on to this second player. They're going to start their turn by looking at all the cards in their hand, and all the other players get to place out their block gems and decide exactly which body parts they're going to block. And this player is going to go through the round process of possibly discarding 2 cards if they want to get rid of a block if they want, picking a color, picking up all the cards of that color, and then if they want, handing 2 of their cards to another player and claiming a body part. You're going to keep doing this until you've gone through all the cards in the game. And of course, if you have cards in a discard pile and one of the body parts is completely empty, you're simply going to shuffle your discard pile to form a new draw pile. The game is going to keep playing until there are no more cards in the discard or the draw pile. Then all the players are going to figure out who has the most completed bodies. Whoever has the most completed bodies is going to be the winner of the game. Now there happens to be a tie at that point. It's whoever's built the most monsters, which happens to be the red cards, is going to be the big tiebreaker. And of course, if there's a tie for most red monster cards, you're going to see who has the most green animal cards. And if there's still a tie for green cards, well, then you have some tied winners. Well, that's basically the entire way you play Dr. Blender's Lab. 60 Dwarves is a set collection game where players are trying to collect groups of these dwarves that they can send down into the mines that are going to go farming for gems for them. And these gems are going to be worth a various amount of victory points at the end of the game. Anywhere from 17 all the way up to 27 victory points. But the trick is these dwarves can only mine a certain amount of gems if they're in certain groups of dwarves, because it takes certain dwarves who have the ability to find certain kinds of gems. Now in the final release of the game, when they actually bring this game out, players are actually going to get gem tokens that they can use, that they're going to gain, that they can get these victory points, which is something I don't have in this promotional copy. Plus there's also going to be a little handout, little player aid that's going to show you exactly what kind of dwarves are required to find certain kind of gems when they go down the mines. For example, it's going to say that if you have 4 yellow dwarves and 3 red dwarves, you can send them down into the mine and they'll bring back 1 diamond, which will be worth 27 victory points. Or if you only happen to have 2 dwarves and you send them down to the mine, they'll bring back an aquamarine, which will be worth 17 victory points. And again, in the final release of the game, you're actually going to get little gem tokens that you can use. But that's something I don't have in this promotional copy. Just understand that's something that's going to be added to the game. And plus, there may be better player aids instead of these little gems right here that are going to represent each player. At the start of the game, players are going to basically figure out the player order for the game. So you have the red player, the white player, the blue player, and the green player if you want to play a 4-player game. But I'm just going to show you a 3-player game so you understand the game a little bit better. Players are going to figure out exactly what the player order is, and they're going to place their marker on the player order track. After that happens, you're going to lay out 2 rows of 5 dwarves apiece. You're going to have row number 1, and you're going to have row number 2. Row number 1 is the row that the players are interacting with at all times. Row number 2 is just to give the players an idea of what row is going to be coming up next. And as soon as this row is handled, these cards are going to slide up and become row number 1, and then you're simply going to draw out 5 brand new cards. Now the lift is double-sided. The lift has a lift up side, and then you can flip it over showing that the lift is down, and down the mines and the dwarves are mining. That's very important. I'll explain that to you in just a moment. On a player's turn, after the game has been set up, no player starts with any cards in their hand, but on a player's turn, they basically need to make one of 3 decisions. On a player's turn, they're going to basically take their gem, and they're going to place their gem representing their worker that's going out there to hire these dwarves or give these dwarves orders and figure out exactly what they're going to do. They're either going to place their gem on one of these colored dwarves on the player aid here. You notice there's a yellow, there's a red, there's a green, there's a blue dwarf here. If I place my gem on one of those dwarves, that means I'm going to claim all dwarves of that color from the top row when we come to the resolution phase. The next thing I can do if I do not want to do that is I can place my token on top of the lift, assuming the lift is up. If the lift is down, I can't do this, but as long as the lift is up, I can place my token on the lift, and only one person can claim the lift per turn except for the final turn of the game. On the 12th turn, the final turn of the game, every single player is allowed to use the lift 1 time. But if I do put my player marker on the lift, that means I'm going to take any dwarves that are in my hand, and I'm going to discard them to the discard pile, which means they're permanently removed from the game. They're going to go down the mine, and they're going to bring back one of the gems back up based on what set of dwarves I discarded. So again, if I were to discard 8 yellow dwarves, they're going to go into the mine and bring me back a sapphire, which is going to be worth 25 victory points. If I go ahead and discard 6 red dwarves, they're going to bring me back 1 ruby worth 24 victory points, but you get the general idea. That's the second option I can do on my turn. The third option I can do is I can decide that I want to take the furthest order up in the player order. Now this is very important because you can see what cards are coming up next turn, and you can see that you definitely may want to go earlier in player order, especially if there's cards that are coming up in the second row that are cards you need to make to start making these sets to get your victory points and get your victory gems. So on a player's turn, I'm simply going to take my gem and decide if I want to keep my place in a player order or possibly move up, or I may decide that I want to claim all the dwarves of a certain color, and once I've placed my gem, we're going to move up to the second player. Second player gets to make the same decision. They're either going to decide they want to go further up in player order, or they're going to decide that they're going to claim all the dwarves of that color from the top row again. And then finally, the last player also gets to make the decision. They either want to move further up in player order, guaranteeing that they have a better chance of getting dwarves from the row in the next round. They can decide to take dwarves of a certain color, or they can place their marker on the lift, sending whatever dwarves they currently have in their hand down into the mines to bring back whatever gems they can get from discarding these certain sets. So after players have placed all their dwarves in all their locations, it's time to resolve all these dwarves and all of our actions that we decided to take. After all the players have chosen their actions for their turn, all the players are going to resolve, but resolution is going to happen in a very specific order. The very first thing that's going to happen is if any players put their token on the lift. Now remember, only one player can place their token on the lift per turn, except for the 12th, the very final round. Again, this game is played exactly over 12 rounds. It's going to play 12 rounds every single time you play the game. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to resolve the lift. Now, if a player had placed their token on the lift, they're basically going to take their token off the lift, flip the lift over, letting the players know that nobody else is allowed to use the lift this turn, and then this player is going to discard any dwarves in their hand that they may have that'll make one of these sets. Now, you cannot discard multiple sets. You basically want to pick the set that's most valuable to you and send that set of dwarves down into the mines to bring back that gem. So for example, let's just say the white player had decided that they were going to use their lift as their action. I would simply remove my token, and let's say I happen to have 8 yellow dwarves in my hand. I would take all 8 of those dwarves, put them down in the discard pile. They are removed from the game. They are not going to come back into this game. And then I would flip the lift over, signifying the lift has been used for this round and nobody else can use the lift. And then I'm going to simply take 8 yellow dwarves, and again give me a sapphire. I'm going to simply take the sapphire from the rewards pile, put him over here next to me on the table, and I'll know that's going to be worth a whole bunch of victory points, 25 of them to be exact, at the end of the game. But if no player has decided to use the lift, we're not going to do the lift. But if you did decide to use the lift, after the lift resolves and after you sent your dwarves down, you're going to become the last player in the next turn. So always remember, you're going to be the last player if you use the lift. So even though player 2 space is open for this player, they're not going to take it. They use the lift, that means they're automatically going to be player number 3 in the next turn. But since we didn't do the lift, we're going to go ahead and ignore that action, and we're going to go ahead and do the next resolution, which happens after we resolve the lift. After we're done taking care of the lift, it's now time for the players to start claiming these dwarves that they may have tried to go to the tavern to try to recruit to send down to the mines. And we're going to resolve this from left to right. That means whoever claimed the yellow dwarf gets to resolve before the red, who gets to resolve before the green, who gets to resolve before the blue. So let's just say in this example, let's move white over here onto the green just so this gets a little bit easier to understand. So the red player gets to resolve first because they took the yellow dwarf. So they're going to look at the top row, and the top row only. Again, the second row does not come into play. It's just an advance warning about future cards that are going to come into play. And I'm going to look at all the cards that happen to match this color, and I'm simply going to claim all these cards and take them into my hand. So I picked yellow, so I'm going to take all the yellow dwarves that are currently on the table, and they're going to go in my hand. And then I'm also going to go into the last available player order, which would be, in this example, third place is, remember, we didn't do the lift action this turn. If I had done the lift action and the white player had done the lift action and claimed the third place, the only place left over for me would be second place, but that's not the case in this example. So after I claim all the yellow dwarves, I'm going to move into the last available place order. And then if I want, and the lift was not used already prior on this turn by another player, I can go ahead and decide to use a lift. Simply flip it over, discard any cards in my hand that make a complete set, to send those dwarves down to the mine to bring me back one of the gems. And again, these cards are then going to be discarded, assuming I have enough dwarves to make a complete set. Now, it's an option. I don't have to do that, but generally you may want to do that, but you can only do that if the lift is available. And again, if the lift has already been used and flipped over to its night side, that means it's not available on this round, so I can't do that. But I don't have enough cards in my hand in this example, so it doesn't matter anyway. So I'm going to simply take these dwarves in my hand, and then the next player in order on the dwarf cards here is going to go ahead and resolve. So if anybody had claimed red, they would go next. Nobody's claimed red, so we're going to move up to the green, and we do see that this player has claimed green. So they're simply going to take all the green dwarves in the top row, place them in their hand, and again, if they have enough to make a complete set and the lift has not been claimed, they can use lift if they want, but if it's already been claimed, they don't have that option. And then they're simply going to take the next player order in order. Now that all the players have resolved and either taken dwarves or used the lift action, we're done with that action, and then all the dwarves that are left on the top row who were not claimed by any of the players are going to be discarded, put into the discard pile, removed from the game. Then all the dwarves in row number 2 are going to move up to row number 1, and we're simply going to draw out 5 more dwarves, letting us know what the future turn is going to reveal, and that's going to be it for all of our players' turns. If the lift card was used by any of the players during that current round, it's going to be flipped back over for the next round, and then players are going to continue doing this process over and over again during the full 12 rounds. And remember, at the end of the 12th round, the lift is usable by every single player, but on turns 1 through 11, it's first come, first serve on the lift. Only the first person to use the lift gets to use the lift on that turn. Players are going to continue doing this throughout the full 12 rounds. At the end of the 12 rounds, players are going to add up the total value of all their gems, whereas the most victory points value in gems is going to be the winner. If there happens to be a tie for the most amount of victory points, it's going to be the player who has the most valuable gem is going to be the tiebreaker. Trust Me is a card game for 3 to 5 players where the objective of the game is to get rid of all your cards. Now in the long game, it's the last person who has any cards left in their hand who's going to be the loser. In the short game, it's the very first person to get rid of all their cards is going to be the winner. You need to decide if you want to play the short or the long game before you start playing. Once you decide if you're going to play the short or long game, you're going to deal out all the cards to all the players. Now in the final release of the game, some of the cards are going to have a number that says 4+, and some of the cards are going to have a number that says 5+, and basically that's going to mean that those cards are only going to be included if you have 4+ players, 5+ players, or whatever, and that just ensures that every single player has the exact same amount of cards. Now since this is up to a 5-player game with 60 cards, if you have 5 players and you have 60 cards, basically everybody's going to get exactly 12 cards. Now there's normal animal cards in the game, and there's 11 different animals, and there's 4 of every single one of these animal cards. Plus there's 6 different very special cards, and you recognize them because they have the different gray background in the background, and none of them look like a real true animal, at least not an animal that matches the artwork of the game. Every single player is going to be dealt a complete hand of cards, and they're not going to show the other players what their cards are, but you do need to make sure you quickly rifle through your hand of cards before the game starts, and make sure you don't have 4 of any single animal in your hand of cards. If you notice that you have 4 of any single animal in your hand of cards, you need to take all 4 of those cards, show them to all the other players, and remove them from the game. And that's going to go on for the entire game. If at any time in your hand you have 4 of the exact same animals in your hand, you simply pull all 4 of those animals out of your hand, show them to the other players, and completely remove all 4 of those animals from the game. That kind of ensures that this game doesn't wear out its welcome and play too long as players start getting too many cards in their hand. After every single player has their complete hand of cards, you basically need to figure out exactly which one of the players is going to go first. On a player's turn, they have one of 2 options. They're going to basically look at their entire hand of cards, and if there happens to be any cards in the center pile, they're free to play one of the special cards, or they can play cards from their hand. But if there's no cards in the central pile, they cannot play any special cards. They actually need to look at their hand, and they need to play cards directly from their hand without playing any special cards at all. Now again, remember the special cards are the cards that do have the gray background. On a player's turn, they're basically going to look at their hand of cards, and they're going to take out anywhere from 1 to 5 cards, place those cards face down without showing them to any other players. Now remember, we're not going to place them face up, we're going to place them face down to the center of the table so the other players can't see what those cards are. And then the next player in the player order needs to try to figure out exactly what we've done. And the way this is going to work is as soon as I place all these cards down, again, anywhere from 1 to 5, I'm going to pick any one of the 11 animals in the game, and I'm going to name that animal. So for example, let's say in this example, I decide to place 4 cards face down, and I simply say rabbit. Now this player, looking at all the cards in the game, knowing that no player can ever have 4 of the same animal ever in their hand, knows that I'm probably lying. Okay, I'm definitely lying. There's definitely not 4 rabbits out here, but they don't know exactly which one of these 4 cards is not a rabbit. So they can call my bluff, and if they call my bluff, they need to pick one of the cards here and hope that they manage to pick a card that does not match the animal I placed down. If they pick a card that does not match the animal I placed down, so for this example I said rabbit, they decide to pick this card and it's dog, I have failed my bluff. I need to pick up the entire draw pile, which could be a lot of cards from the prior player, and these are all going to go back into my hand. But let's say, for example, I decide to place 4 cards down on the table, and next player in line decides to call my bluff and say, there's no way you got 4 rabbits. They're going to look at these 4 cards and they're going to pick one of them and flip it over. And if it does happen to be the animal I called, they're forced to pick up the entire section of cards in the center of the table, and they have to add all these cards to their hand. Now there's one more option a player can do on their turn. If I lay down all these cards and I decide to say rabbit, this player can decide to say, I believe you. Now if they say they believe me, even though in this case they know I'm lying, they just don't want to take any risk at all, then they're simply going to say, I believe you. Then they're going to look at their hand of cards, and they're going to place down on the table, right on top of these cards I just placed, anywhere from 1 to 5 cards, and then they also need to claim the same animal the first player declared. In this case, it would be rabbit. So what I would do is I would simply place down 1 card on the table in this example, and now this player, the next player in order, needs to decide if they believe me and that this is a rabbit, or they need to call my bluff. And again, it's going to be exactly like beforehand. If they say they believe me, this card is going to be added to the stack, and then this player is going to go ahead and take their turn. And they're also going to look at all the cards in their hand, and then they're going to place anywhere down from 1 to 5 cards on the table. And again, they're also going to claim the same animal. In this case, they're going to say rabbit. Eventually, we're going to get to the point where one of the players is going to decide that, you know what, I have rabbits in my hand, so I know you're lying. Or they're going to decide that there's no way that there's that many rabbits on the center of the table, so I definitely know you're lying. So this person eventually is going to decide that they're going to call somebody's bluff. So they're going to look at all the cards placed by the prior player, and they're going to pick one of them. And if it happens to be a rabbit, that player is not going to get the cards back, and this person who called the bluff gets to take them all in their hand. But if, for example, in this example, it's not a rabbit, it doesn't match, the person who played the cards down prior is going to take all these cards and place them in their hand. Now remember, the objective of the game is to try to get rid of all your cards, so you want to make sure you're bluffing at the right time, not over bluffing, but again, not under bluffing, and basically watching what all the other players are doing as you're trying to get rid of all the cards in your hand. After a player has decided to play to call the bluff or not to call the bluff, whether they pick up the cards or not, depending on what card was revealed, it's going to be time for the next player in order to go ahead and do the exact same thing the prior player did, except now that the stack has been depleted and it's went into somebody's hand, the next player doesn't need to pick the same animal anymore, and they're simply going to go through the hand, pick from 1 to 5 cards, place them down on the table, making sure they're going to call out an animal such as rooster. And then the next player in order needs to go through the process of saying, I believe, I don't believe, and either add more cards or call their bluff and flip over one of those cards and try to figure out if they were telling the truth or not. That's basically going to be the flow of the game for the entire game. Players are going to keep doing this until somebody's gone through their entire hand of cards. And if you're playing the long game, it's when everybody except one player has gotten rid of all their cards, and that person is going to be the loser. Or if you want to be playing the short version of the game, the first person to get rid of all their cards is going to be the winner. Now that's the basic rules of the game, and there are a couple gray cards in the game, 6 of them to be exact, which adds special abilities onto the game to add to the replay variety and change up the gameplay a little bit, adding some variety, making sure the game doesn't get too stale. Now there's 6 different special cards in the game, and you can tell what they are by the gray background that they have. And every single one of them has a different special ability, except for the elephant, who doesn't really have a special ability. It's just a card that if you get stuck with the elephant at the end of the game, you do happen to lose, even if you do discard it as the final card. Again, every one of these cards is going to have a special ability, and when you play one of these cards, you can only play it if there's at least one card in the center pile, which means if you're the one to start the new round, you can't play one of these gray cards. But starting with player 2 and going on, you're free to play one of these cards. And every time one of these gray cards is played, the RX are removed from the game. They're not given to the next player in order. So you want to make sure you want to use these cards to the best of your most advantageous abilities. The special cards in order, the very first one is going to be the wild creature card. And the wild creature card states that if it's ever placed in a stack, and this is the only gray card that's ever played as part of the stack, but if it's ever played as part of the stack and it's revealed by any player, the player who actually placed this card in the stack gets to decide exactly which animal this one represents. The next one in order is going to be the Invisible Man. Now, a player is actually going to place this card face down instead of placing cards in the stack. As soon as they play this card face down, they're going to skip their turn, and again, this card is going to be removed. Just like the wild card, as soon as it's revealed, it's also going to be removed. The next one is going to be the Not Enough card. Now, when the Not Enough card is placed, every single player is going to take a card from their hand and they're going to place it on the bottom of the stack. And then this card is going to be removed from the game, just like any normal gray card would be. Next up is the I Believe card, and the I Believe card is going to be played, and the player is going to place this down and reveal one of the cards placed by the previous player. If this card is indeed the claimed animal, the previous player must pick up the stack and put it in their hand. But if I'm wrong, I'm the one who has to put the entire stack in my hand. So it's kind of reverses the rules of the game, kind of adds for a little bit more variety. And again, like all the other gray cards, once it's used, it is removed from the game. And then finally, we have the Tornado card. Now for the Tornado card, basically what's going to happen is every single player is going to place a card face down in front of them. And then the player who placed the Tornado card out there needs to look at all these cards, and they need to pick one. And remember, the animal is still going to remain the same. So for example, if the current animal happens to be, let's say, cat for some strange reason, the player who placed the Tornado card is going to pick one of these cards and they're going to flip it over. If the card does not match what was called, so in this example, cat, the person who owned the cow card is going to have to pick up the entire stack. But if I did flip this card over and it happened to be a cat, since I played the Tornado card, I am the one who has to pick up the entire stack. Now finally, the final card we have is the Elephant card. Now if on your turn the only card you happen to have in your hand happens to be the Elephant card, you instantly lose. And again, players are just going to continue playing cards until you happen to be, in the short version of the rules, the first person to get rid of all your cards. Or in the long version of the rules, you happen to be the last person left in the game, which makes you the loser, and every other single player happens to be the winner. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial video for these 4 very unique games, Dr. Blender's Lab, Trust Me, 60 Dwarves, and the Gallerist, which will be eventually renamed. If you have any comments or questions, of course, please feel free to leave them in the YouTube comments down below. You can also email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews, that's OTSBGR@gmail.com. Stay tuned for my sample gameplay video where I'm actually going to play a couple rounds of the 60 Dwarves game. I'm not going to do the other 3 games because they're pretty quick. This game is pretty much a family game, probably not something you're going to watch played. This game is a game that's really going to require me to have multiple players to play for you to see it, and it's pretty easy to understand. And again, also the Gallerist, much like this game, is going to require you to see a whole bunch of players actually playing the game. I think this is going to be the best one to give you an idea of just the kind of gameplay that's going to be available in these games, so stay tuned for my playthrough video where I'm going to play a couple rounds of 60 Dwarves. Thanks for watching, and thanks for subscribing.